Marcus Hendricks walked into Judge Caprio's courtroom the way you'd expect a billionaire tech mogul to walk into any room. Like he owned it, dressed like a man who'd never known inconvenience. He carried himself with the kind of smugness only extreme wealth could breed. He wasn't there for some major corporate scandal or a high-stakes lawsuit. No, he was facing a string of parking violations, dozens in fact. Almost all of them were for illegally parking in handicapped spots. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He didn't even try to justify it. Instead, when asked to explain himself, he calmly stated that he operated on a different level and referred himself as God in my industry. He didn't bother to attend previous court dates. He ignored citations. He treated every legal notice like junk mail. To him, the rules were a game for people beneath him. Judge Caprio didn't react. He didn't raise his voice or crack a sarcastic smile. He just read through the facts, how Marcus repeatedly dismissed the law, ignored the summons, and treated the courtroom like an inconvenience. Then, without theatrics, he handed down a criminal conviction, significant fines, and community service. Marcus, who clearly expected a slap on the wrist, left stunned. He had finally learned that not even his wealth could shield him from basic accountability. Christine Morrison's case followed, and while her background was different, the entitlement was just as glaring. She wasn't a billionaire. She was married to a police captain. She had been charged with DUI causing serious injury, a serious, life-altering offense. The incident left another driver, Daniel Chun, hospitalized with extensive injuries. Instead of showing remorse, Christine tried to intimidate the court. She name-dropped her husband, Captain David Morrison, and warned the judge that pursuing the case would be a mistake. Her behavior was bold, unrepentant, and built entirely on the assumption that her husband's position would protect her. Judge Caprio didn't flinch. He addressed her as he would any other defendant and reminded her that courtroom decisions weren't influenced by rank or personal connections. Then something unexpected happened. Captain Morrison himself walked into the courtroom, not to support his wife's defense, but to publicly reject her actions. He told the court, without hesitation, that his wife did not represent his values, and that her attempt to leverage his position was disgraceful. He made it clear that his title was not a weapon for her to use, and that he stood firmly behind the court's right to judge her without interference. That moment changed everything. Christine had tried to pressure the system with influence. Her husband, the very man she thought would protect her, took a stand for the opposite. He emphasized that justice had to remain impartial, even when it meant standing against someone he loved. Christine was sentenced. The punishment was not performative. It was serious. Fines, jail time, community service, mandatory counseling. She didn't walk away with a warning or a quiet deal. She faced the full consequences of her actions. In both cases, the lesson was the same. Whether the billionaire flaunting power or someone hiding behind someone else's badge, arrogance doesn't change the outcome. When the legal system works the way it should, status did not prevent consequences. Connections didn't cancel out responsibility. Marcus Hendricks' punishment forced him to confront the very thing he thought he had outgrown: basic civic responsibility. His money and title were irrelevant in Judge Caprio's courtroom. What mattered were his actions, his disregard for others, and his refusal to accept the same standards as everyone else. He walked in entitled and left convicted, both legally and, maybe for the first time, morally. Christine Morrison's story took a harsher turn. Her offense had a victim. Her actions caused real harm. Her attempt to deflect responsibility by threatening a judge backfired not just in court, but publicly, when her own husband stepped forward and condemned her behavior. That kind of moral clarity doesn't come easy, and it cost them both. But it was necessary. And in the aftermath, something shifted. Christine didn't just serve her sentence. She reportedly began participating in victim awareness programs and alcohol counseling. She met with the family of Daniel Chun. It wasn't part of her sentence. It was part of her own path toward making things right. Captain Morrison remained in his position. He received criticism, but also quiet respect. By refusing to protect his wife from the consequences of her actions, he upheld the very integrity his role demands. His decision wasn't just about one courtroom moment. It was about preserving public trust in the system he represents. Judge Caprio handled both cases the same way he always does, with fairness, consistency, and a refusal to be swayed by wealth or influence. His court isn't known for theatrics. It's known for balance, for holding people accountable while giving them the chance to reflect and grow. That's exactly what happened here. Both stories are different, but they meet at the same crossroads. What happens when people with privilege are finally told no? When someone refuses to let their money, their title, or their connection bend the rules. Marcus and Christine thought they could talk their way out of it, that they were exceptions. They learned they weren't. Their stories are a reminder that accountability doesn't care about who you are. It only cares about what you did. And when that principle is actually enforced, the result is justice, not in theory, but in practice. That's the difference between power and character. One fades when the courtroom door closes. The other stands up, speaks clearly, and refuses to be used as a shield. If you think more people need to hear stories like these, of accountability beating arrogance, and justice refusing to bend, go ahead and share this. Drop a comment if you've seen privilege try to push past consequences. And make sure you're subscribed, because the next time someone tries to use power to avoid the rules, we'll be here to talk about the moment it all came crashing down. Christine Morrison believed she had control over the courtroom from the moment she walked in. She stood at the defense table not as a woman accused of DUI causing serious injury, but as the wife of a high-ranking police officer. Her demeanor made that clear. Shoulders back, chin raised, a look that dared anyone to question her authority. She didn't just expect special treatment. She demanded it. Her words weren't subtle. She told Judge Caprio directly that pursuing the case would be a mistake, invoking her husband's position in law enforcement. It wasn't coded language or polite pressure. It was a direct attempt to intimidate a sitting judge, to suggest that she was above consequences because of who she was married to. That's not just arrogance. That's corruption. And she said it out loud. Judge Caprio has dealt with thousands of defendants, but Christine's courtroom performance stood out, not because of her charges, tragic and serious as they were, but because of how openly she tried to manipulate the outcome. She wasn't pleading her case. She was issuing a warning that if the court didn't back off, there would be consequences. Not for her, but for the court. And then everything changed. Captain David Morrison entered the courtroom, unannounced. He didn't take a seat beside his wife. He didn't speak to her. He walked directly to the bench and made it clear in front of everyone that her attempt to use his name and position was unacceptable. He didn't stammer. He didn't soften the blow. He said it plainly. His wife had crossed a line. Her behavior didn't reflect his values. Her use of his authority was inappropriate, and he didn't support it. That moment silenced the room. This wasn't a private conversation. It was a public disavowal. A police captain choosing the integrity of the justice system over protecting his own spouse. It wasn't performative. It was deliberate, and it was absolute. The message was clear. Justice would proceed without interference. Christine's reaction to her husband's statement wasn't recorded, but her posture changed. The confidence drained. Her gaze lowered, because in that instant, the illusion of protection shattered. She had walked into court expecting immunity. What she got was independence. From her husband's reputation, from assumed privilege, from every invisible shield she thought would insulate her from accountability. Judge Caprio sentenced her, as he would anyone else found guilty of driving under the influence and causing harm. Jail time, fines, court-ordered counseling, community service. It was a sentence that fit the crime, not just for its legal weight, but for what it represented. A rejection of the idea that proximity to power can rewrite justice. Christine's story didn't end at sentencing. After her release, something shifted. According to reports from those involved in her mandated counseling and community service programs, she changed, not overnight, not dramatically, but gradually and steadily. She began taking responsibility, not just saying the right things, but engaging with the process. She spoke less about how unfair the system was, and more about the damage she'd caused, the harm she did to Daniel Chun and his family, the consequences of her choices. There was no press tour. No public apology campaign. What she did quietly. Because now, finally, it wasn't about being seen, it was about seeing clearly. and that clarity extended to her relationship. While Captain Morrison and Christine remained legally married, the status of their personal relationship shifted. No one confirmed a separation, but public events made it clear that the dynamic had changed. He continued serving in his role. She remained absent from any formal police or community gatherings. The line he drew in court remained. Captain Morrison's decision to speak against his wife's actions wasn't universally celebrated. Some in his department questioned it. Others called it brave. Regardless of opinion, the act itself became a defining moment. A police officer openly rejecting the misuse of authority, even from within his own home, sent a message that resonated far beyond that courtroom. That message was echoed again in Marcus Hendricks's case. Marcus, unlike Christine, didn't have a criminal charge with a physical victim. His offenses were municipal: repeated parking violations in handicapped spots and contempt of court through misappearances. But what made his case so egregious wasn't the technical nature of the violations. It was his attitude, his refusal to acknowledge the law, his complete dismissal of court authority, his declaration that he was God in my industry. These weren't throwaway comments. They were a worldview, one where success replaced accountability and money erased consequences. Judge Caprio didn't react to the bluster. He just reviewed the record. Dozens of ignored tickets, consistent abuse of accessibility spaces, and open defiance of court orders. Then came the sentence. Criminal conviction, heavy fines, mandatory community service. Marcus didn't walk out with a warning. He walked out a convicted offender. In the month that followed, his public image declined. Investors stepped back. Business partners quietly distanced themselves. The persona of the untouchable tech genius took a hit that no PR firm could reverse. Because once the courtroom footage hit the internet, there was no spinning it. The arrogance spoke for itself. And like Christine, Marcus had to face something new: reality. The man who ignored court dates was now required to report to a supervisor for community service. The one who claimed to operate in a different league was now picking up trash and scrubbing sidewalks. There were no assistants, no executive perks, just hours of manual labor in the city he used to believe was beneath him, and it changed him. He didn't become a saint. But according to those who oversaw his service, Marcus stopped complaining. He stopped posturing. He showed up. He finished his hours. He even asked to continue volunteering afterward, not because he needed a photo op, but because, in his own words, "I owe more than time." Christine and Marcus started in different places. Their crimes were different. Their backgrounds were different. But their beliefs were the same: that they could use status, connections, or wealth to sidestep responsibility. And both learned, publicly, undeniably, that justice doesn't bend for the powerful. It holds its line. And that's what made these cases matter. Judge Caprio didn't do anything dramatic. He didn't lecture or grandstand. He simply applied the law, consistently, fairly, and that, in a system often criticized for bending to influence, was revolutionary in its own quiet way. The stories of Christine Morrison and Marcus Hendricks aren't unique because of the charges. What makes them stand out is how they ended, with accountability. Real, enforceable, public accountability. And in today's world, where people in positions of power are so often insulated from consequences, that's something worth paying attention to. Marcus Hendricks and Christine Morrison didn't walk into Judge Caprio's courtroom as equals, but they walked out with the same lesson burned into their pride. You are not above the law. Marcus believed money could solve anything. That's not speculation. That's how he lived. Parking in handicapped spots like they were VIP passes, blowing off court appearances like they were beneath him, and referring to himself as God in my industry, without even a hint of irony. To him, fines were just an inconvenience, not consequences. They were background noise. But the courtroom didn't operate on his schedule, and it didn't care about his portfolio. When he finally showed up, probably assuming he could pay a fee, shake a few hands, and be on his way, he met a very different energy. Judge Caprio was calm, not condescending, not theatrical, just grounded. And when Caprio calmly laid out the extent of Marcus's violations, the courtroom felt like it shifted. This wasn't a petty offense anymore. It was a pattern, a deliberate, repeated disregard for anyone who wasn't Marcus Hendricks. And when Caprio handed down the conviction, it wasn't for show. It was a result of a man who'd refused, again and again, to show even the most basic respect for others. The community service wasn't just symbolic. It was necessary, because until that moment, Marcus had never actually been required to give back. And according to those who witnessed it, the transformation didn't happen on day one, but it happened quietly, through repetition, through the discomfort of doing something not for himself, but for the community he'd treated as beneath him. No headlines, no redemption arc, just change forced through consequence. Christine Morrison's story cut in a different direction. Her offense wasn't about convenience. It was about control, and it came with real damage. Driving under the influence, causing injury. A man named Daniel Chin spent weeks in the hospital recovering. Lives were changed. But Christine didn't walk into that courtroom with remorse. She walked in with entitlement. And she came ready to use the one thing she thought could shield her, her husband's badge. Standing there, facing serious charges, she said it directly. Pursuing the case would be a mistake, not because the facts were wrong, not because she was innocent, but because of who her husband was. She thought the courtroom would bow. Instead, it stood taller, because then Captain David Morrison walked in, not to defend her, but to dismantle the illusion she was trying to maintain. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look for attention. He simply stated that his wife's actions were her own, and that he stood by the rule of law, not her abuse of it. It was more than a personal betrayal. It was a public commitment to justice. Christine didn't walk out with leniency. She walked out with a sentence. Fines, jail, counseling, community service. The message was crystal clear. Influence cannot rewrite the law. Her journey afterward wasn't glamorous. She served her time. She entered counseling. And, according to those close to the process, she slowly, very slowly, began to understand what she'd done. She eventually met with Daniel Chen's family, privately, without cameras or press. She apologized, not for appearances, but for accountability. It's not redemption. It's not erasure. But it's a start. And in both stories, there's a common thread that cuts through all the noise. Consequence matters. Judge Caprio didn't deliver theatrical takedowns. He didn't grandstand. What he did was much harder. He held the line. Even when it meant challenging a billionaire. Even when it meant confronting someone protected by the illusion of law enforcement immunity. He showed that justice doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. And let's not forget Captain Morrison. Because standing up in uniform to say your own spouse was in the wrong, that doesn't happen often. That's not a press release. It's a personal reckoning. And he didn't flinch. He said, essentially, no one gets to use my title as a weapon. That kind of leadership is rare. And it made all the difference. Because both Marcus and Christine learned something the hard way. Something many never do. When you strip away the money, the title, the excuses, you are what you choose to do when no one can save you. And they both made the wrong choice, until the consequences forced them to make better ones. Christine faced jail and public disgrace. Marcus lost business partners and became a cautionary tale. And while both are now quietly trying to rebuild, their stories serve a much bigger purpose. They prove that when the system works, when judges don't bow and integrity shows up even in the most personal moments, justice can actually mean something. If you think more people need to hear stories like these, share this video. Leave a comment if you've ever seen power misused and wish someone would finally say, enough. And make sure to subscribe, because the next time someone thinks they can talk their way out of consequences, we'll be right here to show how it all falls apart.